Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Chancellor. Thank you very much for joining us. We have been able the last few moments to savor the anticipation of your arrival. So now we look forward to hearing what you will say. And I'm glad that you're joined by Delphine Traoré, who is the CEO of Allianz General Insurance in Africa, the regional CEO. Let me start, Chancellor, by asking you to say a few words about the challenge that we're talking about of the multipolar world, whether this has made cooperation harder, if so, how, and what challenges you see for the next few years.
Thank you for your question. First, I'm absolutely convinced that we have a multipolar order. This is nothing like a method of how things should be. They are like this. And I'm absolutely opposing the idea that after we've had this bipolar order between Soviet Union and United States in the Cold War, we will now enter in a new time, bipolar, but United States or China. No, this will be not the truth. Many of the countries of Asia, for instance, like Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, India, or some more, or from Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, many others to be named from South of America will not accept to be just the followers of others. So they will develop their own strategies. But it's absolutely necessary that we understand that there are some principles relevant for a functioning multipolar order. And the first is that it is not revisionist, so that no one is trying to attack others and to change borders by force, which we now see with the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And it is absolutely of essence that all the countries, how different they may be governed, understand that there are some basic rights of the people that should be looked at. If this is the case, I think we have a good chance for a peaceful development of the world, and for the people in the countries and states to find their own ways for governing, hopefully, being a Democrat, going to democracy.
And Delphine Traoré, I know, I mean, you are looking on the ground in Africa at the challenges, not just the economic and the climate challenge facing Africa, but also this emerging multipolar world, which maybe provides a space for Africa, but also makes life more complicated.
First, thank you, Chancellor, for the privilege and the opportunity to have a conversation with you. And I would also like to thank the Berlin Global Dialogue for the platform. If you allow, I'll maybe draw a landscape of the economic situation in Africa right now. We are 1.4 billion people. 60% of our people are below the age of 25. Then we look at the economic growth in the past few years, which has outperformed the rest of the world, to be honest. We are also home to most of the raw materials that are necessary for the energy transition. But we are a continent in crisis, right? Our youth are unemployed. Our women are often marginalized. Our children are hungry. 1 in 4 Africans go to bed hungry every day. Our climate, at least we are heating faster than the rest of the world, which means that our soil are being destroyed by extreme weather events. So we are in a situation where it will be important to have our global, at least our African leaders, both from the private and public sector, so I appreciate that you recognize that today, Chancellor, at the table of the discussion, because it's important for us to discuss what is important for the energy transition, because we have a key role to play, but also where financing goes when it comes to climate adaptation. There's been a lot of opportunities supported by the German government and also by Allianz blended finance mechanism to support climate adaptation, climate change. We have the Africa Growth Fund. We also have the one that you've been personally supporting, which is your Global Shield against climate risks, with an important support from German government to start, at least the first pledge. So I think it's important that the conversation happens across the board, that we are all often at the table, so that we can take the continent further. Because we cannot get to net zero in 2050 unless we invest into Africa energy transition.
Chancellor, the challenge that Delphine has laid out, and we also heard echoed by a South African economist in a question in an earlier session this morning, is how is Germany, how is the rest of the G20 going to support Africa and other developing countries in achieving net zero? Because currently they're letting the continent down. They're not providing enough support.
First, we have to understand that there is a technological question. And this is a question which is also important for us. So many in my country and other politicians will face the same questions in their countries. Many ask me, what sense does it make that we are trying to be climate neutral in 2045 in our case? We are just 2% of worldwide emissions. And let's do something at another place. It may be useful much more. So my answer to this is, all what we want to do and what we want to achieve is that there will be big growth also in the countries of the Global South, especially in Africa. And if whole Africa is just going following the path we followed the last 200 years, this will be not really something that works for the whole planet. We couldn't live on this planet if all people of the world, the 10 billion of the midst of the century we will face, will have the standard of living we had in the 60s of the last century. And this is something we can reach, and I'm quite confident that this is feasible, but it will not work if we do it with fossil fuels, if we do it with coal, oil and gas, because then the planet will not survive this approach. And what we have to understand in Europe, in North of America, and many of the rich industrialized countries, that it will not be a solution that we just give money for not developing and for just staying where they are. So we have to invest into the technological, in the technologies that could be used on the globe for growth at all the different places, but without harming environment. Mm-hmm. The second is we have to use the resources the countries have, and this is especially the case when we look at minerals and raw materials and all the things necessary for energy transition, for instance, as you mentioned. I'm absolutely sure that it is necessary that we organize a chance that mining could be done in these countries, looking at environment, looking at indigenous people and their situation so that all will benefit from it, but that we are also ready to organize that the first refinement, the first processings are done at the place of the mining, because this gives growth and wealth to the countries and is much better for environment. And I think this is a change we need in the global way to act with minerals and these developments. We have debates about raw materials coming just from one or two countries. But if we look more deeply into the case, we will find out the material is grabbed somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So it would be a much more resilient world if we develop these industries in those countries for all of us, and it gives a chance for development in the countries. The next, I think, which is important, is that we understand that there are some needs where the world is depending on a rare number of suppliers. Let's just look at fertilizers, a question which is so important now when we look at the agricultural sector. There are difficulties because the exports from Russia, Belarus and Ukraine are hindered in the one or the other way, and the whole world is depending on all these things coming, for instance, from Russia. And why not making it feasible that there is a production, that there are production sites in Africa, in South of America, and other Asian places for making the world more independent. And then there are two next steps that we should have in mind. The first is we should help with our investment strategies, with our with the development banks, that there is a chance for developing renewable energies in the countries, wind, solar, which is not really used intensely in Africa, though it is the best place to do it. And this is the same with all the needs we have with geothermal developments. There are many places in Africa where this could be a relevant factor also for electricity production, not just for heating. And understanding this, there is a good chance for development which we can make feasible in partnering. On the other hand, we have to cooperate. The development banks have to change their strategies. We are working intensely on that. And we have to cooperate, for instance, in the way how doing business. This is the idea behind this compact with Africa, which we worked for so intensely since years.
Did you want to?
Yes, if I may, maybe I'll take on the comment that you had, Chancellor, on mining and agriculture. Cooperation, partnership are keywords for us. When we look at the mining sector in particular, I think it's important that we don't just, as we are mining in our African countries, that we're not just, building schools here, creating a pond here for women to go and source some water, but that there's a true partnership in ownership of these mines. I think that is what will also create development on the continent. On the agricultural sector, we have 60% of the uncultivated land of the world. But climate change is impacting the nature of our soil. There's an opportunity to invest in climate adaptation in Africa, because once we are able to increase productivity on agriculture, we can also help diversify the supply chain for food in Europe or anywhere else in the world. But right now, productivity is not strong enough to do that, because there's a $40 billion financing gap when it comes to climate adaptation in general. So I think it's an opportunity for us to say there's investments that are going, but it's just not enough. 200 billion by 2030 is needed in the energy sector, in particular in Africa. We cannot get to transport the minerals if we don't have the roads to get to the mines. We cannot export the food if we have no ways to get to the agriculture sector to be able to export. So it's a very complex ecosystem that I think we need to fix. One key thing we should not, and I will say this, usually when I hear aid for Africa, I said we hope to get to the point where we're not talking aid anymore, right? That we are equal partners at the table, that we have some things to contribute so that we can, make the world a better place, just to be pragmatic there. But I think it's important. Mining, we need to be partners, and agriculture, we can help diversify the supply chain.
And I think just to be a bit more specific, when you think about the question of scale, I mean, Chancellor, you and President Macron were in Paris earlier in the summer, and there was discussion of the Bridgetown agenda, but you were the only two of the G7, and I think you heard the South African president talk about how he felt let down, the very tiny amount of money that has been pledged to South Africa for its just energy transition partnership, how slowly that was going, what a fraction of the needs it represented. So in this multipolar world where people are looking for these kind of partnerships, how are you going to prove to Africa and other developing countries that you're really willing to support this transition?
we have to do what we say. So this is absolutely necessary, walk as you talk. And in case of Germany, we try our best. So we pledged for climate financing, and we are actually doing it with the billions we said before. So this is what is happening, and it will be helpful. This year, I think the industrialized countries will reach the $100 billion goal to they invest into climate financing and the things related to this. So this is a good progress if we look at the past, because it took years to get there. And as far as we can expect how it will be in the end of this year, this 100 billion figure will be reached the first time. So this is a good message. But there are still a lot of things to be done, and this is also the case when we look at the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, which we established, and very good format that works with many countries, and all have to do their case. And looking at Germany, we can say there is a strong contribution. It's not just loans, it's also grants, and this is something we are proud of.
But Germany itself has shelved plans this week for stricter energy rules for new houses, and has made less aggressive the targets to replace oil and gas heaters in private housing. I mean, when you say you have to walk the walk, you are reducing your own targets to meet your goals.
No, we are just managing to act more intelligent. So this is what we are doing. And
So watering down those commitments will not affect in any way your ability to meet your 2030 target?
We are intensely working on this. The first thing is that we are doing all our best that we meet our energy transition goals, which means that we will have 80% of renewable energies producing electricity in Germany, which is something. And this will be more electricity as we produce today. Germany is one of the most industrialized countries, and this is a very special aspect of the German economic model. And so we use a lot of energy. Today it's 650 terawatt hours, which is a lot. But we will increase this to 750 or 800 in the end of the decade. And 80% of this will be renewables, which is a big lot. And we are also discussing how to increase the electricity production for the 30s, developing the grid that is necessary for doing so. So the investments are now planned for the end game of the electricity grid in 45. And we are also deciding on plans to produce electricity with gas and later hydrogen if there is not enough sun or wind in Germany at the time when it's needed, because we need a 24/7 supply of electricity to all the companies and all citizens. And this is essential that we reach this. We will take our decision on the hydrogen grid in Germany this year, and the necessary decisions related to that, so that all can trust in their own future, because they know electricity and hydrogen will be there if the companies are looking for this. And the same is with electromobility and the change in the reducing emissions with cars and trucks. We are planning for the grid of 2030 with much more cars that are electrified, 50 million, and we are doing the same with the trucks. And we made it legal that the grid companies have to provide for this situation and invest now, that this is feasible to work with such a situation. We are doing the planning for what house owners will have to decide the next 20 years when they have to do something with their heating. And now they have a situation where they can understand what will be feasible for them. Is there a public supply they can use, or is there something they have to do just on their own? And so this is well prepared. Many decisions, difficult decisions, but all are done for the same aim, to meet our aim that in 2045 Germany will be a wealthy, global competitive, industrialized nation, but CO2 neutral.
But just to confirm on the changes that you made recently, the slowing down of the timetable for private housing, does that, you will have to do something, you have to announce something new to meet your emission reduction target for 2030, or you think you can still?
It is millions, tens of millions of households that will have to take decisions. And obviously they will do the decision when the time is for doing so. And I think if we want to keep the support of the people, we must always organize that this is something they can really manage and afford. And just this is what we did. I think it is not a very good idea to fight climate change in making all people angry.
That's fair enough. I want to come back to Delphine in 1 minute, but I just also wanted to just put to you, because it's important at events like this to, if we can, to sometimes be concrete about what we're talking about. And the contribution this morning from the South African economist, I think, forced us to be concrete about the world we have today, as well as the world that everyone here would like. She pointed out that it has become very difficult. There are many problems with South African energy system and many reasons why there are blackouts. But one of the problems is it's very difficult to invest in coal-fired power stations, or indeed other power stations in South Africa, because of the changes in global rules. At the same time as Germany is increasing its reliance on coal as a result of Ukraine, and indeed importing coal from South Africa. Can you see how that, for many, particularly in South Africa, strikes them as an insane reflection of the imbalance in this debate?
I'm sure that all people in South Africa will have heard that there is a war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and that Russia stopped the gas supply to Germany and Europe. So there was an export of 880 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia to Europe. It's now 40 billion that is left. So something had to be done to survive this very special situation. And this is what we did. And luckily, Putin planned his war not at the right time. If he would have done 5 years later, we would not have had the possibility just to use the old coal plants for producing electricity, but we still had them because we closed them 1 year ago or 2 years ago. And so we reopened them, but we will continue with what we said before. In 2038, we are out of coal for electricity, and this will be not changed.
If I may, I think this debate has been going on in Africa for a while, that we have not been able to industrialize ourselves yet, so it's important that we continue using coal, that we continue using oil and gas for this. I have to maybe disagree a little bit, and I'll get some of my African colleagues on my back, but our planet is a global good. So if we get into the conversation, yeah, but you used it, and I mean, you were able to industrialize yourself with certain dirty energy, so now you need to let us do the same thing. I mean, we're going to go into circles, and at the end of the day, we're not going to get to net zero anytime soon. I think what is more important, and this is my ask to you, dear Chancellor, is to say we need to accelerate the investment then into green energy in Africa. We understand that the 100 billion will be met, but those tend to be focused in certain parts of the continent. It's North Africa, it's South Africa. So I was grateful to see that you have visited the rest of the continent, some very difficult areas in 2022 and also in 2023, hoping that this is also an opportunity to start investing in the rest of the continent, but there's an acceleration needed. Blended finance has worked quite well. There's a lot of work being done between Allianz and the German government, and I think we need to see more of that. Accelerate that, so some nations that are still trying to industrialize themselves are not continuing to use these energy sources, which is impacting the rest of the world. The argument from my colleagues will be, yeah, but we are emitting less CO2 than the rest of the world, which is absolutely true. But there's also a responsibility now for the rest of the world to also invest faster into green energy in Africa.
I do agree. So we have to work on creating an investment environment that works. And yes, there is a lot of public money that will be spent, and I spoke about the amount and the big number of the big figures that Germany is contributing. But in the end, it will be just a small percentage of what is needed, because the real investment must come from the private sector. So our politics must go about the question how we can manage, create a situation where this is happening. Because when it happens, a lot of things will be feasible. Just looking at the development of China, if I may say this, it is not too far away from today that Deng Xiaoping opened the Chinese economy to market processes, and that many companies from all over the world, from the United States, from Germany and other places, invested in the country, and this created the environment for their growth in the last years. And creating an environment where investment is feasible, where you can be sure about the things you are doing, and the rule of law, to be very clear, is of essence to make this something that works. And so I'm convinced that you're right, and we must cooperate with the money we give as government support, with what the development banks are doing and how they are doing and how they can increase their activities and how they can look at the aims that are necessary for a stronger development in Africa. But we also have to create an environment where private companies do it as a business chance. And when we get there, the rest will happen fast. One thing I would like to add, because you mentioned it earlier, and I would like to use the chance to agree with you, infrastructure is still key. Even in our countries, a very good infrastructure and a bettering of the infrastructure has an impact on economic growth. And even more, this is the case if there is nearly no infrastructure of streets, railways, electricity grid, and so on. And if we make it happen that this is expanding, this will have an impact on the growth in the countries. And this is also the case when we understand that we should work together on infrastructure between countries. So still the infrastructure of many of the African countries is organized to the seaport, and not between the countries. And this is something that should be changed, and if we are successful with that, this would create an own opportunity for growth.
Absolutely.
Would you support the multilateral development banks having the financing to stand behind the lending to Africa and other places to reduce the cost of hedging, you know, as part of the Bridgetown agenda? Do you think, because that is a way to do what you're talking about, catalyze much larger amounts of private money?
Yes, and looking at the World Bank, we decided to pledge for 300 million of a very big million of extra hybrid capital, which gives the World Bank a better chance to do their job in this case. And we are working together with others to remodel the activities of the development banks so that they are more courageous in investing into the necessary developments we are speaking about.
Do you see a role for additional, I mean, there are some areas where the need is for grants rather than loans, and sometimes that's harder for the individual countries to give. So people have talked about taxing the carbon emissions of international shipping, or a fee on oil exports to raise an amount of capital for these additional grants. Would you support either of those?
It is always possible to discuss ideas like this, but in the end, I think the most important step would be to develop a situation, to create a situation where there is an economic growth that is going on its own. So we have to incentivize this development, that this is happening, and this is the most important aspect. I think it is quite difficult. We are discussing about the questions whether there should be a special tax or something like this on shipping and CO2 emissions related to that. If you're one of the oceanic countries, you possibly have some questions about it and some doubts. But it is a debate that it makes sense.
Okay. Delphine, I mean, I mentioned about grants versus loans. Obviously, countries right now, many in Africa, are at risk of debt distress, especially in an environment as we looked for higher interest rates potentially into the future. What do you see on the ground needing to happen on debt? How much action is needed on that front?
I think I'll have to take the question a bit differently, right? But there was a session this morning that spoke on the debt of our African countries and reminding us that as soon as we are taking these loans in a foreign currency, then as soon as we have a devaluation, then we owe 10%, 15% more, which is squeezing the countries even more. As we start moving into this energy transition, we talked a lot about mobilizing private capital. We have institutional partners that have up to, 100 trillion in assets under management. This is where we need to pull the funds from. This is where we need to create a blended finance mechanism, which I've said now a few times, that includes government, DFIs, and the private sector, to manage and help. And then this is how you also ensure that the interest rates that are being charged to these countries are reasonable, that the structure of the debt is so that they can repay for it. Because if not, we go around and around in circles with these African countries. They borrow, then we need to invest into energy transition and capital and climate change, but there's no money to do there. Then we go and get some more loans in euros or in dollars, and then there's fluctuation in the currency, and then we owe more, and then it just goes around in a circle. At some point, I think it will be important to say we need to stop the going around in circles, as I said, and focus on, I think blended finance, to be honest, is, in my viewpoint, an answer. But it's not just private sector, it includes public sector, and it includes a good investment platform to be able to manage that, in my view.
But a source of lot of financing in the last 10 years in Africa has been China, have been the Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative and other lending. How does that change the options for countries, and how does it change the game? Has it changed the way people view these different opportunities or challenges?
I'll say, and I'll repeat myself again, we have a huge financing gap. There's a lot of support that we are getting from the EU. It was music to my ears when we found out that the African Union was not now part of the G20. This collaboration between the global south, as we call it, and the global north, and where capital should come from, and where investment in infrastructure should come from, is not really the topic. I think the topic right now is there is a gap. There's partners like Germany, like the European Union, that are really, and taking the time to go on the ground. So it's not just, this is Africa on a PowerPoint or in an economic research document. Leaders like the chancellors are actually going to countries where most people have not been. And this is what I've talked about, partnership. We will continue to partner with the European Union. The African Union is not part of the G20, and I think this is where the discussions need to happen.
But at the last G20 meeting, we decided to invite the African Union to be part of G20. See? So this is the process which happens now, yeah. And I'm really happy that this now was feasible, and was also a very good message, because it was a mistake that just the number of African countries participating in G20 is that small.
Yeah.
And that it is also the case that the African Union was not invited. Now it will be different for the future. I think there is a question with debt, and there is also a question with debt from China, to be very clear on this topic, because different to what many people think, the biggest lending is coming from China and not from the European Union, not from the United States and the institutions related to them. And big parts of the government debt problems in Africa are the money that could not easily be paid back to China. So this is why we always invited our Chinese partners to go into the Paris Club, which they have not done so far with saying they are just a developing country. And but we managed to have a common strategy with a framework within G20, and this is now trying to get some results in Chad, in Zambia, and some other states, and hopefully more. Sri Lanka, hopefully.
Sure.
And so I think that that this is the big task, to get a global agreement that we have to help those countries whose debt are too big to pay for.
And how is that? Are you still confident, or are you confident that you can have the conversation with China on those issues, bringing them more around the table, trying to involve them in these debt renegotiations, involving them in climate conversations and collaboration, at the same time as we have so much focus on tensions between the US and China, and of course the EU now also potentially launching a trade war against China a long way in the distance.
Obviously, this will not happen.
But when you took that is the challenge of multipolarity and multiple levels of discussion. Do you find it is difficult to maintain? Do you think it is a challenge to maintain this conversation with China at the same time as the debate is becoming more fractious on the economic front?
It is a challenge. It is complicated, but it is a need that we find a common solution. And I'm quite confident that this will happen. I'd already mentioned the common framework we built with G20 to find a way how cooperation could happen, though not all are participating in the Paris Club. Because the Paris Club is, in the end, the lessons Europe and North America learned from their mistakes in loans to countries that they could not pay them back. And now we are inviting others to learn the same lesson. And I'm sure we will find states we are not discussing about today that will be in the same situation, because they will understand that not all the money they give to others will come back, because they will not be able to manage this. And so we need a common strategy, and this is also about information. So if it's a secrecy who is giving money to whom, the problem that there might be a too big debt for a single country without all different other countries understanding it is there. So we have to work on cooperation to help the countries in Africa, in South America, and other Asian, and many Asian regions, that they can live with their debt and that they have chance for new investments, which is necessary.
But it's rather awkward timing if you're trying to bring China on board and also to persuade them that Europe is not going to use the challenge of carbon transition, energy transition, as a way to bring in more protectionist measures. It seems like the odd timing to have this EU investigation of Chinese electric vehicles. It seems rather French, if I may say so. And yet you've supported it.
Being really a supporter of the very good German-French partnership, I cannot agree to what you say. But the economic model which I favor is to have a global competition. I'm very much in favor of globalization. I think it made it that billions of people left poverty, that many came up to middle class in many countries of the world, that many new cities had been built and will be built, and that we see new highways, new railways over the world, airports, hospitals, universities, schools, all these spreading up all over the globe, and this is a good thing. Our task must be that this is not just a part of the world, even if it's a big part, that our task must be to work for the whole world to participate from the chances of globalization and to grow and to have their own infrastructure and industrialization and things like that. And this would be also a much safer world, to say it. But the economic model, let's say, of Germany, but I think it is a model that fits for the whole world, is that we are not working protectionists. We want to sell, to say it, our cars in Europe, in North America, in Japan, in China, in Africa, in South America, in all the places. But this means that we are open to get the cars of other countries also on the market of Germany. And I still remember what was it, the big debates that started when the Japanese cars came to Germany. No, they are part of the market, and there is now German cars in Japan and Japanese cars in Germany. What is the problem? And the same happened when the Korean were successful became successful car producer, competitive on the whole world. They're doing a good job, and now there are German cars in Korea and Korean cars in Germany. What is the problem? And we should look on these things like this. It is the better alternative than the protectionist way.
But it sounds like you're saying the European Commission and France should not be so concerned about these imports and should worry more about German exports.
I think that what is the big thing behind globalization? That we are always discussing about the big companies, and yes, they are there and they are really successful. But the real chance is that there is the possibility of scaling up for a company with 500 employees, with 1,000 employees, with 2,000 employees, serving the world market. And if we reduce for this Mittelstand companies of the world with 500 employees the market to certain regions, they will never get the scales necessary for all the technological and economic developments to produce cheaper products. So you see me as a social democrat favoring market economy.
Only in Germany. We have, I want to go back to Delphine, but I also want to put you on notice. Questions from, if you want to go to the now familiar location to ask a question. You've got your Chancellor here, you know, quite a good opportunity. Okay, well, you must go over there. But Delphine, I have let the Chancellor take too much of the floor, but you know, he's the Chancellor.
Yes. I had my ask, so I'm okay.
You have asked, and you've focused us on the financing gap. But what is one concrete action on that? I know you talk about blended finance, but is there something that would be relatively easy to agree, whether at the COP28 or the next finance ministers meeting of G20 to support you on the ground doing that?
I have to say, I hope that we have African cars in Germany in my lifetime.
And he's going to welcome those as well. There will be no probes.
That would be good. I think one point is there's a lot of, we talked about blended finance, there's a lot of investment happening. I'll maybe share one of the big ones that happened and is moving the needle. We need more of those. There's the $8 billion investment in a railway in Egypt that was supported by the German government and Siemens. This will give 40,000 people a job, and from what I understand, it will also even reduce carbon footprint by 70% because people, I mean, we're in a country of 100 million people. People will no longer be taking cars and buses, etc. These are the type of investment that move the needle. So if there's one ask, is that all investments, can we start with the B number rather than the M? Right? Because that's where we see the change. We see small investment here and there, 100 million committed here, 200 million committed here, but it's creating these large-scale investment that really move the needle.
And when it comes to what's
I do agree.
When it comes to what's going to be needed, it's got a T in front of it, not even a B.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Okay. Question. A brief question so we have time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Matthias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer. I have a question to both of you, and I'm very glad that the Chancellor touched upon China because I think it is definitely the big elephant in the room. But I think we need to go beyond that point of just saying we do trade with everybody and no protectionism. That is very clear, but we are doing that at a moment on a very asymmetrical basis. China, as you have mentioned, is still considered in the WTO as a developing country, although it's the second biggest economy in the world. China has just sold 100,000 units of BYD cars, highly state subsidized, to the biggest German car rental company, which is of course not an example of symmetric competition. It's unfair competition, or in any case it's state subsidized competition. China is contributing 32% to world CO2 emission. That is more than the 5 biggest emitters together, more than the US, the EU, India, Japan and Germany and Russia together, not the EU. So, and China has increased its coal plant power in 22 more than the rest of the world combined. So any green tech discussion, any climate policy without China is pointless. To reduce the 2% of CO2 emission by global air traffic is nice, but it's not going to solve the problem. So I think we have to deal with China. And here's my question. I think to negotiate with China, to invite China, and to create incentives for China to do trade with us based on fair terms is nice, but you should do it out of a position of strength. Could you imagine that there is an alliance of countries, the US, the EU, India, Japan, other big democratic economies, and Africa, although Africa is already highly dependent on China. Could you imagine that through such an alliance we could simply increase our negotiation leverage with China? Thank you.
I would leave it to you, Chancellor.
So first, thank you for making the point that all the goals we are working for will just work if we have the same aims together with China and others, and that we invite all to participate in solving the problems. This is what we are trying with COP28 and all the activities related to that. This is what we are trying with all the different other activities on climate action which are helpful. This is also the case when we strengthen the international organizations which have the aim to work for a fair and level playing field. So I very much would like to underline the answers possibly WTO, and the other answer is possibly OECD. So.
Can I, just following up on that, because I know there's a lot of German companies who are struggling with the high energy costs, and there's a question about China, but actually, of course, there's a very real contrast with America now in terms of the costs they're facing, and certainly when it comes to new investment. You said you don't want to have a permanent subsidy scheme to help industrial companies with their power prices. But are you maybe thinking about a temporary support mechanism? Because at the moment it feels like the Mittelstand and others that you're talking about have a massive disadvantage on the cost front, on power costs.
So especially in the crisis we faced when there was the stop of energy supply from Russia from one day to other and all the energy prices increased, we did a lot to do this. We created a 200 billion fund for subsidizing industry and private customers just to survive the situation. And many here in the room will be quite impressed because this is not the money they can use for all the problems they try to solve. It was a big number. It will not be necessary in the end to use all of them, but it was the statement all could rely on that we will be able to fight the situation. And we did in the end. We managed the energy supply question and we also managed the pricing problems with the best means we have. And now the biggest task is that all the decisions we are taking are not making it impossible to reach the aims we are following. So we want to have a permanently cheap energy and electricity supply in the future. And this is why it is today necessary to invest all the money we need for having renewable energies as for electricity, for changing the way of production for steel companies, for chemical companies, for those producing cement, pharmaceutical companies, and this is what we are doing, and it's running quite successfully. There is a debate whether there is a short period where extra subsidies would be necessary, but there is a good reason behind the need for a long discussion on what is the right way to do, because if we then hinder the necessary investments into increasing our grid and things like that in new production sites, for instance, for cheap renewable energy, this would be a mistake. So it is not very easy to do it, aside of the question of money to be spent. We are looking at it.
I wanted to check that there's a question here.
Thank you very much. My name is Mamoloko Kubaye. I'm a minister in the Republic of South Africa. Thank you very much for the insights, Chancellor. We really appreciate it, and the discussion has been quite enriching. As you know, in South Africa, we are indeed, and I picked up quite a lot of discussion about our country and the just transition. Part of the challenge in terms of what we have to face, I guess, it's what all of us have to face, the challenges of our society, our citizens, and having to look at what is important in terms of our own citizens in our countries. But more importantly for us, and I think the conversation went into funding, we're having difficulties because some of the conditionality of the funding are related to the targets, the Global Action Plan that we have. And in that case where we have darkness and we're trying to fundraise, including our own banks, and part of what I would want to know, would we be supported, would you stand and support us as a country and the continent in terms of the review, because we're likely not to reach the 7 years targets, the review of the Global Action Plan so that we can be able to have sustainable communities and society. Thank you.
So we have ended up talking quite a lot about South Africa, but that is a specific question.
But I think there is an appeal for being pragmatic. Yes, I agree. It's always necessary to be very pragmatic in dealing with things you agreed on. And this is, I think, what I would always support. Just coming back to what you said, I think it is really necessary to look at the real situation. And it was important for me to speak with many leaders from Africa. You mentioned some countries, but I did it a lot now during at all the different occasions, and I also visited a lot of them. And I will continue to do so. And the next two countries I will go to will be Nigeria and Ghana. And this is just to give all the idea that this is a true activity which we will not do for one day, for 1 year, for something like this. This is a continuous strategy we will follow the next decades.
Thank you for that.
Delphine, do you feel the Chancellor has visited a number of countries in the global south and has made a point of reaching out in this multipolar world? Of course, on the outside, it's easy to say, well, it's too little, too late, not just from Germany, but from Europe and other leaders when, for example, China has been so active. Do you feel there is still goodwill and an openness to having this kind of engagement, or are you looking for those B numbers more than anything else?
The B numbers are always nice. No, it's not too late. I think we in Africa maybe also we need to take responsibility where maybe we have not raised our voice loud enough to share that there's no energy transition possible for the world if we leave Africa behind. Now that we've been heard, and now that we've been put at the same platform to have conversation on collaboration and partnership, I think we're in a different situation now. It's never too late, but it just means that we need to invest more faster.
Chancellor, Delphine Traoré, thank you very much.
Thank you.